computer and share this one.
Yeah. Go back to the beginning. Yeah. Start from the beginning. Wait, don't record yet. Start now.
Just starting, hon.
What's the beginning? Right here.
Yeah.
Slideshow.
From beginning. Now start the sharing.
Yeah, it's sharing now.
I mean, start the recording.
Yeah, the recording started.
Okay. Wait, stop it. Start it again.
You can.
Oh.
You can only do it once. You can only record.
Okay. All right. So this week's double parsha is Vayakhel-Pekudei. And what happened to my and that's the question that we're going to talk about. Why the repetition? What do I mean? It's almost an entire word for word repetition of the instructions to build the Mishkan, the actual carrying out of the building of the Mishkan, of the vessels, of the garments, the priestly garments. So in Parsha Truma Tetzaveh, we had the detailed instructions, what materials, all the measurements, the Aron, the Ark, the Shulchan, the table of the bread, the menorah, the walls, the courtyard, the altars. And Vayakhel-Pekudei, this week's Parsha, it's a detailed performance of the same. And again, all the materials, all the measurements, everything is repeated to the last detail. And so why couldn't the Torah just say, and they carried out God's commands as they were commanded to? Or you can say, who did it? Bezalel, the artisan, and Oholiab, and the people carried out all the instructions. And you know what would be the benefit of that? So, but instead, we have an almost identical word-for-word repetition, just in the past tense, that they did it. So if in Teruma, let's see an example, because I like to see, so there's 200 extraneous verses. If you look at it that way, that is extraneous. Because instead of, we could have gotten to this Kiddush way faster.
That's a good Kiddush.
Instead, hopefully you'll all join us Shabbat morning. You'll see it adds, I don't know, something along the lines of a half hour, 20 minutes or so, which could have been avoided. Now we know the Torah doesn't waste words, and so this repetition is glaring. It's perplexing. Torah is usually not verbose. It's actually the opposite. Often it doesn't describe feelings, and you have to look in between the lines. And here it goes on and on and on and on, and just to give you a real feeling for it.
Well, I have an interpretation.
Oh, okay. Wait 1 second. Wait 1 second. I want you to feel how boring, so to speak, this repetition is, or how unnecessary. So let's see an example. All right. So in Teruma, okay, it's on the right-hand column. And I took the ark. So what material? From Atzei Shittim. That's the red letters. Look in this week's Parsha. Vayakhel, Vayas B'tzalel Ta'aron Atzei Shittim. And then in green is the measurements. Now we go to this week in the left-hand column, same thing. Okay, now you should cover it with gold. And the right-hand column, vetzipita oto, in future tense. We go to this week's parsha, vayitzapehu zahavtaho, and he covered it in gold. And then, there was a zel zahav saviv, and you look on the other column, zel zahav saviv. There were 4 rings, albata bot zahav, on the right-hand column in purple. Then you go to the left-hand column. Again, he did the 4 rings. Then the thing that we talked about 2 weeks ago, about the poles. So, you go down a few sentences. In black bold, Vasita Badei Atzei Shittim, do the poles, make the poles, and cover them with gold. And now in the left-hand column, and he did, and he performed Vayas Badei Atzei Shittim, and he covered them with gold. And then the prohibition that we talked about, bring those poles, slide them into the rings, and then in the left-hand column, and he did it. And then. And finally, this one actually is not repeated. The prohibition, because there's nothing to repeat about it. This is just a a long-standing commandment for future generations. "Betabot Aaron yiyu abadim, lo yasuru mimenu." The poles shall be in the ark, never to be removed. Okay, so you can't actually say that was performed. That's just a prohibition that has to be abided, that has to be obeyed. Okay, but now you get a feeling for what a repetition this is, instead of just saying, "And he built the ark as commanded." All right, now let's hear, Bill. What do you suggest?
Well, it's from my work. It's explicit quality control, quality assurance, step by step, making sure that things are done properly, rather than saying, "Oh, we did everything you wanted." Right? No, you got to verify it. You must verify that the action was taken.
Oh, I like that explanation. So Bill says this teaches us about the carefulness, about quality control, that everything was done properly. They didn't cut corners. If the Torah were to say just "and they did it," or "they did as commanded," we don't know that they actually, performed all the details and paid attention to all the details. So I want to go along those lines and suggest something similar. So I'll call this explanation one. So I said that Bezalel, we saw the verse, right? Vayas Bezalel, but that's not accurate. There were others who the Torah specifically says at the beginning of Vayakhel that many people participated in this. Yeah, he was the big artist, he was the big name, but first of all, many people brought materials. And then even in the actual building, he couldn't do everything by himself. There's no way in the world that he could have done all of those vessels and the walls and the priestly garments by himself. So many dozens, maybe hundreds of people all collaborated. And so perhaps that's why it's not enough just to say they did it. You want to mention that they did everything, all these details, because they all came together. They all came together, each one bringing their own skill, each person bringing their own skill. Whoever knew how to draw, drew. Whoever knew how to cut wood. Whoever knew to weave clothes, they wove clothes. Whoever knew how to use hammers and nails. Whoever did, so it's whoever, maybe some people just were strong men. They were able to carry these heavy materials, menorah out of solid gold, very heavy thing to make. So some just helped transport from place to place. So everyone somehow participated, and to show that, the Torah repeats all the details again. And what's interesting is that there's no complaints from people who are prone to complaints. All the Torah they complaining about everything. Yet here you don't hear anybody squeak about, "Oh, this is too hard. Oh, this is too heavy. Oh, this is too difficult. Oh, this is going to take too long." And so when you give people things to do, maybe this is a lesson. When you give things, they don't have time to complain. When you tell them to sit down and start actually being tachlis, giving of their time, of their work, then there's no rebellion, no dissension, no arguments about who's in charge and I want to be in charge. And what we're so used to in other parts of Shmot and other parts of the Torah, challenging authority, that doesn't happen here. It's very interesting. And so maybe part of the reason is they were so engrossed in the details of if we look at these details again, of all these measurements, when you're so busy, measuring, and you got to make sure it's a 2.5 amot and the width is a 1.5 amot. When you're so busy with that, you don't have time to start challenging authority and rebelling and complaining and kvetching. So it teaches us how to, when we have a big group of people, it's a way that we can get everybody on board. You give everybody a job and you specify details, and that creates cohesion. And this idea is from Rabbi Pinchas Peli.
And Shammai, it also creates ownership, and that's a big component. They don't feel like they're being cut out. Right.
That's an excellent point. So when everybody participates, it's theirs. It belongs to everyone. I like that. Yeah. So everyone feels a part of it. And yeah, nobody feels left out, which is also very important in such a project involving holiness. And the other thing is a big no to corruption and embezzlement. How do we know that they actually used all these gold and silver and copper and expensive cloths? How do we know that they didn't take into their pockets? The only way to know is to give a detailed account. It's like accountants, right? Accountants have to show exactly where every dollar went, or people, officers and companies, they in order to show that, you have to get into the details. There's no way to show, and especially since we're dealing with such expensive materials, that again, to avoid dissension and arguments and accusations. Oh, you want all this gold because you're going to take some for yourself. The only way to assure people is to get into the details and say, okay, here's where it went. Here's how we built the menorah. Here's how much went to the ark. Here's what we did with the copper, and so on and so forth. And so that could be another reason for the detailed repetition. And now I want to offer you another. Oh, anybody have another idea before we go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, first I want to point to the very end of the double portion, the maftir for Pekudei. And that would be, well, I'm pointing it out not only because it's my bar mitzvah portion, but aside from that, we get a spectacular result. I don't think it was, promised or predicted in Teruma and Tetzaveh, but at the very end, where it says, Vayichas Ha'anan et Ohel Moed, the cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and Uchvod Hashem Malei et HaMishkan, the glory or honor of God was filling the entire Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. So besides carrying out all the work orders, that's a pretty spectacular result for everybody to witness and point to.
Oh, great. So this actually ties in very well to explanation of Rabbi Foreman. And I have a video for you about that where he explains this idea of the Anan, the cloud of glory at the end of our Parsha. How does that fit in? And let's remember what was in between. I'm not going to get into this Schubert because I think we have time for both. But the reason I have Schubert on the screen and the impromptu Opus 90 number 4. So in my high school, my final matriculation exam in music, I played this piece and I learned it and I went to discuss it with a musicologist. And so I became an expert on this piece. And one of the things I discussed with his music teacher, I had to write a paper about it, is that it's structured as ABA, meaning there's the first part, which is fleeting notes fast all over the piano. The second part, B, which is slow and more melodic. And then Schubert does something interesting that's very similar to what happens in our Parsha. He brings back the entire section A, note for note, no change. And it's a couple of minutes long. And so I discussed with my teacher, why would he do that? Why won't the second A be a little different? Why repeat every single note that was in the section A? And my teacher, and then I discussed it with my father, Alav Shalom. And my father's idea was that after we heard B, now we can appreciate A in a different manner. We see it in a different light. It's not the same. We first entered the scene with the A, with the quick notes that are all over the piano. And it would be nice to hear it, but I don't have time for 2 videos. But then we got used to a very slow melodic movement. So now the second A is a different A. And so how does this tie in? What happened? What big tragic event happened between the commanding of the Mishkan and the actual performance?
Golden calf.
Right, exactly. The Chet HaEgel, the golden calf. That's our B here. So now you might think that things will change, will not be the same. And now we can appreciate A in a different light. We can appreciate all these details about the Mishkan and the fact that they are not rebelling and they are not, arguing with Moses, particularly in light of what happened in B, in light of this big tragic failure that they had. So to talk about that, I'm going to invite Rabbi Foreman, who discusses this in his video. So
surface of the words, and this pattern extends through the entire second half of the book of Exodus. I want to show you this structure, or at least part of it, and examine some of its fascinating implications with you. So this pattern is an Atbash structure, otherwise known as a chiastic structure. We talked about these kinds of patterns a little bit back in Parshat Lech Lecha and in Parshat Vayera. If you haven't seen those videos, I encourage you to go back and take a quick look. The way an Atbash structure works is that a text is arranged so that its first element mirrors its last element, its second to first element mirrors its second to last element, third to first mirrors third to last, all converging towards the center of the text. Atbash, of course, gets its name from the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, mirroring Taf, the last letter. Beit, the second letter of the alphabet, mirroring Shin, the second to last letter. Academics will call this kind of structure a chiastic structure. So I believe that there is a very...
Oh, what happened?
elaborate chiastic structure that isn't just a few sentences long, but it's actually about 15 chapters long, and it spans the entire second half of the book of Exodus. I explore this structure in great detail in a series of lectures that's on the audio part of our site entitled Shattered Tablets and a Calf of Gold. I encourage you to check those out, but let me give you one or two highlights from that here. If you look at the second half of the book of Exodus, starting from chapter 25 or so, the main theme that occupies the text for a number of chapters is the command to build the tabernacle. Now that takes you all the way from chapter 25 through the end of chapter 31. Right after the last commands to build the tabernacle, you get a section of text in which God commands the people to observe the Sabbath. After that, starting with chapter 32, you get the greatest disaster in the book of Exodus, and that is the extended story of the golden calf. So far we have three elements: the construction of the Mishkan, the Sabbath, and the golden calf. But now look at the end of the story of the golden calf. If the story of the golden calf begins with Moses at the top of the mountain, getting tablets of the law that he's supposed to bring down, the story of the golden calf ends with Moses on top of the mountain again, getting a second set of tablets. He had shattered the first ones, and he's there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he's coming down from the mountain again. And that takes place at the end of chapter 34. And just as that story ends, beginning of chapter 35, what do we have? We have a command to keep the Sabbath once again. And then just a few verses later, after that command, we have a long extended section, wouldn't you know it, the actual construction of the Mishkan. So you can begin to see it. Command to build Mishkan, Shabbat, followed by the disaster of the Egel, followed by Shabbat and the actual building of the Mishkan. Now, I've just given you very, very rough parameters for this chiasm, but the truth is, if you drill down deeper and actually look into the text, you'll see in each of these sections there are multiple details. And as you look into those details, you'll find the chiastic structure gets played out in the details too. Let me just give you one quick example of that. Look at the transition from the first Shabbat section into the golden calf section. Take a look at that first sentence, chapter 32, verse 1. Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe laredet min ha'ar. And the people saw that Moshe was taking a long time coming down from the mountain. Vayikahel ha'am al Aaron. And they gathered against Aaron, and they demanded from Aaron that he make some sort of replacement for Moses for them. And this, of course, leads to the golden calf. Now look at that phrase, Vayikahel ha'am al Aaron. And the people gathered against Aaron. Now let's play a little game. How many times do you think a word comprised of those particular letters, Vav, Yud, Kuf, He, Lamed, has appeared until now in the Torah? It turns out this is the first appearance of that word. Now let me ask you another question. What do you think is the second occurrence of those letters in the Torah? Well,
So what's the second time? It's the first word of our parsha this week. Vayakhel, right? That's that, which takes its name. The Parsha's name takes its name from Vayakhel, same letters, but a different verb category. In the first one, it was they gathered, and in the second one, and Moshe gathered the people.
Wouldn't you know it? It's at the exactly corresponding spot on the other side of this chiasm. Let's look at the transition away from the golden calf story going into the second Shabbat command. Take a look at chapter 35, verse 1. After Moshe successfully comes down from the mountain, Vayakhel Moshe, Moshe gathers the people and tells them, this is what you must do, observe the Sabbath. It's the very same letters, Vav, Yud, Kuf, He, and Lamed, pronounced differently this time, Vayakhel, a play off of Vayikahel. So the very first times we ever have this combination of letters, it all takes place at exactly corresponding points in this chiasm. And if you think about it, one Vav Yud Kuf He Lamed is the exact mirror image of the other. The people had just been commanded about the Sabbath, but Moshe was on top of the mountain and the people thought he was lost forever. So they gathered against Aaron and demanded a replacement for Moshe. But the second time you have these letters, it's a success. Moshe is back at the bottom of the mountain, and it is Moshe who gathers the people and commands them about how they must observe the Sabbath. So that's just a little example of the kind of detail which exists when you really drill down and see what's happening on the verse-by-verse level. But now let me take you to the edges of the chiasm. The thing you could always ask in a chiasm is how far does it go? What are its outer edges? If you look at the current edges of the chiasm, the command to construct the Mishkan on the one hand, and the actual construction on the other, let's ask, does the chiasm extend even further? Which is to say, does the event that precedes the first command to construct the Mishkan mirror the event that follows the actual construction of the Mishkan? Okay, so right after the Mishkan is constructed, chapter 40 in the book of Exodus, end of verse 33, Vayichal Moshe et hamlacha, and Moshe finished all the work of the creation of the Mishkan, and then Vayichas ha'anan et ol moed, and then the cloud of the divine presence came down and descended upon the Mishkan, uchvod Hashem malei et Mishkan, and the glory of God filled the Mishkan. Now let's go back and look. What happens at the corresponding place in the chiasm on the other side? In other words, what happens right before the first command to construct the Mishkan? Let's look at the end of chapter 24. Vayal Moshe lahar, and Moshe went up the mountain, and look what we have. Another cloud. Vayichas ha'anan et ahar. The cloud of God's presence covered the mountain, Mount Sinai. Vayishkon kvod Hashem al har Sinai, and the glory of God goes and ensconces itself on top of Mount Sinai. Fascinating. At the two ends of this chiasm, we have two cloud sections, the cloud of God's presence. In one case, God's presence resting on Mount Sinai. In the other case, God's presence resting inside the tabernacle. Now let's zoom in a little bit closer on these two end sections and see if in the details they correspond to each other. Let's go to the first section in chapter 24. There's this cloud on top of Mount Sinai. Vayichaseu anan sheshet yamim, and the cloud was there for 6 days. And then Vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi mitoch hanan. God called to Moshe on the 7th day from inside the cloud. Mar'eh kvod Hashem ka'esh ochelet b'rosh hahar. And the glory of God was like consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Le'enei b'nei Israel, in the eyes of all the people of Israel. They saw this incredible image of intimidating, burning fire. And then, miraculously, Vayavo Moshe b'toch hanan. Moses went into this cloud. Now, do we have anything that reminds us of all of this on the other side of the chiasm? It turns out that remarkably, we do. If you look carefully, just at the corresponding spot at the other side of the chiasm, on its outer edge, we have another cloud story. The cloud of God's presence is back. And once again, Moses attempts to encounter it. Vayichas ha'anan et ol moed. This time, the cloud comes down and covers something, but it doesn't cover a mountain. A mountain is a natural feature of the world, something that God made in creation. Now the cloud comes, and it covers something that man made. It covers the tabernacle. Ukvod Hashem malei et Mishkan, and just like before, the glory of God was at the top of the mountain, resting on top of the mountain. Here it's not resting anywhere. It's inside. The glory of God fills the tabernacle. And now we encounter something surprising. Moshe, as he did before, at the top of the mountain, tries to encounter God. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el ol moed. And Moshe was not able to go into the Mishkan, ki shachan alav ha'anan, because the cloud was there. Do you see what's happening? The holiness of God in the tabernacle is so intense that Moshe can't even enter the tabernacle. The text is going out of its way to compare the tabernacle experience to the Sinai experience, and it is saying that however much God was present at Sinai, that was just a drop in the ocean of the intensity of God's presence at the tabernacle. Not even Moshe could enter. It's a stunning victory for the Jewish people. In the golden calf, God had said, "I dare not come inside you lest I destroy you." Bit by bit, the Jewish people had built back their relationship with God until this crowning moment when God would come and dwell in their presence with such intensity that it dwarfs the actual Sinai experience itself. And where is God this time? Not at the top of the God-made mountain, but inside the man-made structure. God has come down into our world. And now there's one more point of correspondence: the fire. Do you remember the fire the first time? God had called to Moshe from the cloud, and the cloud was like fire, fire that was consuming fire, that was intimidating. And the entire people stood back upon gazing at the fire. Now, one more time at the end of the chiasm, there's fire, but it's a different kind of fire. Balot hanan me'al mishkan, when the cloud would lift from the top of the tabernacle. It would be a sign that it was time for the Jews to travel. Yitzu b'nei Yisrael b'chol ma'aseh, the Jews would travel. V'im lo ya'aleh hanan, but if the cloud would not lift, they would stay where they are. Ki anan Hashem ala mishkan yomam, because the cloud was there for the Jews by day. Ve'esh tieh layla bo, and at night it turned into fire. Leinei kol beit Yisrael, in the eyes of all the Jewish people. One more time, there's a cloud and there's fire. One more time it happens, Leinei b'nei Yisrael, in the eyes of all the people. The first time, it was a fiery cloud. Now, the two phenomenon, fire and cloud, separate. There's a cloud by day, there's fire by night. And before, whereas this image was just intimidating, that caused us to stand back from afar in awe, now it's gentle and benevolent. The cloud leads us, tells us where to go and when, and the fire illuminates the night and provides guidance, comfort, and light. As intense is the holiness of God in the tabernacle, and it is more intense than Sinai. Now, after the golden calf, after the relationship between God and the Jews has finally been repaired, the presence of God is there as a kind, gentle force. It provides for the Jews. It leads them, it shows them where to go. It gives them light and security. God, the being from beyond, is there for us in our world, in the place that we made for him, and his presence is there to take care of us.
Okay. Well, very interesting. Building back the relationship. I always like to see things with a critical eye. So my only problem with that is that God's presence, he talked about so much in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. But in many verses, we see that God says, V'shachanti betocham, I will dwell among you, among the people. The emphasis is not that there was God's presence in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And I think that's a lesson from the golden calf. God doesn't constrict himself to any one particular place. And V'shachanti betocham, I will dwell among you, among the people. And I think he emphasized too much this idea of the holiness inside the tabernacle. What do you think? We don't hear you, Natalie.
I just was in awe of the structure, that somebody can figure out that structure. It's like looking at the atom splitting, it's amazing.
Yeah. No, very interesting video, very interesting commentary, and provides us another interpretation or angle to understand all these details and say this is part of building back the relationship with God after the Chet HaEgel, after the golden calf. Okay, any other comments?
Oh, Shammai, can I ask you a question about the words?
Uh-huh.
So that word is, that Vayakhel or whatever it is connected to Kahal, right?
Correct.
So is Kahal in the Torah, or is it a made-up word based on the?
No, it's in the Torah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's the modern day also audience, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Kehillah is more community, but Kahal in modern Hebrew is audience.
Right.
Yeah. It's all related to that same root. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I also had, I guess, following up Natalie's comment, and that is with this amazing structure that some people can find and clearly produce within the Torah and Tanakh, it seems to kind of be against those who take the view of the documentary hypothesis, that there are different authors, so to speak, and that there was a redactor or editor who put all different traditions together to give the Torah. I mean, the way that those supporters of documentary hypothesis describe it, it seems way too haphazard to produce an exquisite literary work, as by Foreman and others can reveal. That's what it means to me.
Yeah,
So-
I agree. I found it almost scary, the perfection of that who could create that kind of balance in a literary work. It's amazing.
Yes, and to me that just solidifies the fact of God writing it, because I also don't think that, especially at that time, that this construct could have been made by man.
Isn't it possible there was a literary ancient equivalent to Shakespeare who did it? Why is that impossible?
Why don't we have a trace of that dude?
Why don't we
We
have?
don't.
I don't know. I couldn't argue it either way. I personally believe it's from Hashem, but if it was written, as Charles said, by humans,
They say.
we should have hired those humans for the National Security Agency because they could come up, either they could break anybody else's code or they could create a code that nobody else could figure out.
All right. I like the graphics of his video, that's for sure.
Oh, that was
He
beautiful.
is a teacher.
The whole thing gives a poetic power to the.
Yeah.
Yes, poetic. Yes.
Yeah, very poetic.
Awesome.
Almost like
awesome.
something that's lost if you don't see it in such a magnificent, majestic way.
John, I have a great lesson. One of your best.
Oh,
That's
there you
good.
go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, the guy talks with a lot of suspense and how he delivers it.
Yeah.
Being in a class of his would be amazing.
Okay, let me bring up the Marv. We're ready for Marv.
That's the only one that came so far.
Yeah, that's why.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, I pulled it up. Let me share my screen. Anybody want to lead, Marv? Okay, I'll
No.
lead. Anybody?
I'll do it, Shema. Jack,
Okay. All right, go ahead, Jack.
let me get up. All right, everybody ready? Adonai Baruch. Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Achai v'kayam tamid yimoch aleinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai amari v'aravim.
Amen.
Amen.
Yalvasa atasa mimenu leolamim baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael.
Hello. Okay. Where are we on?
Ma,
Okay. From like beginning or it already started?
we're finished.
Vayomer. We already started.
Back. I'm going to Adonai Elohechem emes.
Yes.
Emena calls over time.
Eloheinu ki hu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Suso v'anachnu Yisrael amo. U'malchut sabaratzon kiblu aleihem. Moshe v'nei Yisrael l'chana shira v'simcha rabba v'yamru chulam.
Ichamocha be'lima, ichamocha be'ador ba'kodesh, Rashi Yosef Tzefela.
Rasila otei bela. Malchut sara uvanecha okech gam lifnei Moshe ze'eli anu v'yamru.
Noyim Lokli, Alam Boed.
Le'olam va'ed. V'nemar ki pada Adonai yesh Yaakov v'lo miyad chazak mimenu. Baruch atah Adonai go'al Yisrael.
Amen.
Ushmor tzitze'enu v'leinu l'chaim l'shalom yatav yad olam baruch atah Adonai shomer amo Yisrael. Okay, so we're going to do a Hatzi Kaddish now, and that'll be followed by a silent Amida. Yiskada v'yiskada shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Divarachu say v'yamlich malchu say b'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayecha b'esh Yisrael. Lagala bizman karib v'imru. Amen. Yishmei rabbah v'elam omed maya. Yisbrach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisramam yisnaseh v'yisadar v'yisaleh v'yisalal shemei dekudusha. Min kol birchasa v'shirasa tishbachasa v'nechamasa amiran b'yama v'imru. Amen. Silent Amida. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't finished the Amida, please continue. All others, we're moving on to Kaddish Shalem. Yiskada v'yiskada shemei rabba.
Amen.
Divrach Yerusei v'yamlech machusei b'chayechan v'yomechan v'chayrecha b'esh Yisrael. Agalav izman kari v'yimeru. Amen. V'yisbrach v'yishtabach v'yispor v'yisramam v'yisnasei v'yisadar v'yisalev v'yisalal shemei kudusha v'richei leila min kabir chasa v'shirasa tishbachasa v'nechamasa namiran b'yama v'yimeru. Amen. Iskabel Salasan Abusan the Chai Yisrael Kadamu Bahandi Vishamaya Vimaru. Amen. Shlama Rabba Min Shamaya Vachayim Alenu Vyalka Yisrael Vimaru. Amen. Say Shalom Bimrama Yas Shalom Alenu Vyalka Yisrael Vimaru. Amen. Alenu L'Shabel Adon HaKol. Anachnu korim umishtachavim umodim. Akasu b'sorasecha Adonai imloch li'olam va'ed v'ne'emar
Melech al kol haaretz,
Retz
Omer.
Yeah, Mourner Scottish. Do we have anybody that's observing a yard site tonight?
Yeah, Dad has your site for my mom, and I do too.
Okay, so her what your mom's, let's stick with English. Your mom's English name was?
Helen Finkelstein. It's Haya.
Okay, I'll just go with Helen Finkelstein.
Okay, thank you.
So, may her memory be, may her memory be a source of blessing. Okay, Warner Scottish.
Yitkadal.
Shalom.
Amen.
Yasha Koach.
Yeah. Good to all that showed up this evening.
Have a good night.
Have a good
All
night.
right.
Right.
Good night.
Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Yasher Koach V'Shamai.
Erev Tov.
Thank you. Sei gesund.
All right, go with the Yiddish.
Sag gesund.